Welcome back. This is day 2 of genetics. So today we're going to be trying to figure out what is DNA composed of. So DNA, we've heard about this molecule before. Remember, this is deoxyribonucleic acid, but we just know it as your genetic instructions. So these are the genetic instructions found in the nuclei of your cells. So today we're going to figure out what that actually looks like if we zoom in super close. But before we get into that, you guys have got one do not question. So go ahead and pause this video and tell me, what is this section labeled A in the diagram? So I'll give you a hint. This is a segment of DNA. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. So go ahead and pause this video. Tell me what that segment of DNA is, and then press play when you're ready to review it. All right, so maybe use process of elimination, but hopefully you figured out that the answer here is C. This is part of a gene for a particular trait. Anytime we see this phrase, segment of DNA, we're talking about a gene, and these genes code for specific traits. So maybe this is the gene that codes for eye color. Maybe this is the gene that codes for skin color. Maybe this is the gene that codes for hair color. So each section of those genes is going to be coding for a different physical trait or characteristic, which we learned yesterday is called your phenotype. All right, so let's get started. So as I said, we're going to be looking at DNA's structure today. But before we dive into too much detail, I want us to read through this paragraph together. And we're going to use this information to answer the questions that follow. So as always, follow along with me. Highlight any important words or phrases that will help you answer those questions at the end. Now, I will warn you, there's construction happening above my apartment, so if you hear any loud bangs or thuds, don't worry. Hopefully the ceiling won't cave in, but there's no promises on my part. So let's get started. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other organisms. Now, when we see this word hereditary, we need to know that we're talking about material that is passed on, specifically passed on from your parents to you, from parents to offspring. Okay, nearly every cell in a person's body has the same DNA. Most DNA is located in the cell's nucleus, where it's called nuclear DNA. But there's actually a small amount of DNA that can be found in your mitochondria. And we call this DNA mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. Now, I've got a fun fact for you. This mitochondrial DNA only comes from your mother's side. So you don't get any mitochondrial DNA from your dad's side. It all comes from your mom's. Isn't that crazy? So the information in DNA is stored as a code made up of 4 chemical bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. I'm going to warn you now, you're going to see these 4 bases a lot. So make sure we get comfortable with these 4 names. So anytime you see the letters A, G, C, or T, we're talking about the code that makes up our DNA. And these bases actually pair together in really specific ways. Okay, and we're going to call those rules the base pair rules. So with these 4 bases, they're very specific about who they hang out with. Okay, they've got one partner and one partner only. So adenine, A, always pairs up with thymine, or T, and guanine always pairs up with cytosine. They're never going to switch partners. A is always with T, and G is always with C. So a good way to remember this is a lovely little phrase called all teachers go crazy. Now, I'm not considering myself in that category, but all teachers go crazy. A and T always pair together. G and C always pair together. We're going to talk about that some more as soon as we finish reading this. So human DNA consists of about 3 billion bases, and more than 99% of those bases are the same in all people. The order or sequence of these bases determines the information available for building and maintaining an organism. And when we talk about building and maintaining an organism, we're actually talking about building proteins, which is a process known as protein synthesis. And we'll be talking more about that tomorrow. All right, and this happens similar to the way in which letters of the alphabet appear in a certain order to form words or sentences. DNA bases pair up with each other. A bonds with T, and C bonds with G to form units called base pairs. Each base is also attached to a sugar and a phosphate and is called a nucleotide. Nucleotides are arranged in two long strands that form a spiral called a double helix. This is that shape that we know DNA as. The structure of a double helix is somewhat like a ladder, with the base pairs forming the ladder's rungs and the sugar and phosphate molecules forming the vertical side pieces of the ladder. So if you look at this picture of DNA over here, you can kind of see that this looks like a ladder that's been twisted up in a really weird shape, right? So here we've got the two side pieces of the ladder. Those are going to be the sugar and phosphate molecules, which we'll actually talk about tomorrow. And then the rungs, or kind of the, I don't know, ladder anatomy, but the rungs of the ladder, or the parts that you're going to step or hold on to, are those A's, T's, C's, and G's. So it's like someone took a ladder and then just twisted it up into a double helix. And that is what our DNA looks like. Right? So now let's answer some questions about what we just read. First up is, what does hereditary mean? So hopefully you remember that hereditary is talking about the passage of biological traits or characteristics, specifically from parents to offspring, through the inheritance of genes. So we're basically just talking about what genes or what characteristics you inherit from your parents, what they pass on to you. Right, number two, DNA, or nuclear DNA specifically, codes for all of our traits, but what do you think mitochondrial DNA is used for? So think about, what do we know about the mitochondria? Hopefully we all remember it's the powerhouse of the cell, meaning it's used to create energy through a process that maybe we remember as cellular respiration. Is that ringing a bell way back from Unit 3? So mitochondrial DNA actually holds the instructions for how our cells undergo cellular respiration to create energy. And remember, this mitochondrial DNA only comes from your mom. Just a little fun fact for you. Now, what are the 4 DNA chemical bases? I told you guys we'd see these a lot. Those 4 bases are adenine and thymine, and guanine and cytosine. So remember, A always pairs with T, and G always pairs with C. All teachers go crazy. All right, number 4, if there are 2 identical twins standing next to each other, what can we say about the percentage of their DNA that is the same? And how about for a set of fraternal twins? So this is a tricky one, but I will tell you that for identical twins, 1 egg is fertilized, but eventually splits into 2. But with fraternal twins, 2 different sperm fertilize 2 different eggs. So what do you guys think? Identical is just 1 egg, 1 sperm. And fraternal is 2 eggs and 2 sperm. Well, oh, I need to erase that. Hold on. Let me move that. All right, so with identical twins, because there's only 1 egg and 1 sperm involved that just later splits, they actually share close to 100% of the same DNA, right? That is just 1 fertilized egg. They have almost identical sets of DNA. There's a little bit of a difference, but most of that is due to environmental conditions, which we'll talk about later. But with fraternal twins, since there are 2 fertilized eggs, they only share 50% of the same DNA. Right, and last question, why is DNA called a double helix? Remember, it's that ladder that looks like it's been spiraled up or twisted. So the double helix describes the appearance of double-stranded DNA, which is composed of 2 linear strands that run opposite to each other, or what we call anti-parallel, and twist together. So remember, we've got those 2 rungs of the ladder. And those, or I'm sorry, I should have said those two side pieces of the ladder. And then those rungs are composed of those A's, T's, C's, and G's. All right, and it's twisted together. So now the very last question I've got for you today is, we know that DNA has two strands. It's a double-stranded molecule. I've given you one strand of this molecule, and based on what we know about base pairing rules, so all teachers go crazy, I want you to figure out what the second strand of that DNA molecule looks like. All right, so remember, your A's and T's go together and your G's and C's go together. What does that second strand look like? Go ahead and pause this video, fill in your guess, and then press when you're ready to review it. All right, so strand 2 should look like this. C, T, G, T, A, G, and then T, A, C. Now, you may have noticed that I actually split this strand into 3s, and that wasn't a coincidence. The reason I split this into 3s is because this is what we call a codon, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. Again, I'm throwing a lot of vocab words at you, but when we're talking about codons, we're talking about series or a series of 3 nucleotides. All right, so 3 nucleotides are kind of bound together, and that's going to issue out sort of a special code that helps your cell build proteins. But again, I'm getting way ahead of myself. We'll be talking more about this in the upcoming days. But that's all I've got for you guys today. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But other than that, fill out your exit ticket, submit this as well as that exit ticket, and then you are good to go. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.